Welcome to today's session of City Scripts, which is a conversation on the relationship between writer and the city. I'm Asha from the Word Lab, and City Scripts is our monthly curation of book talks, panel discussions, lectures, and more that bring the city alive. I'm very happy to introduce our speakers for the day. We have Dadapeer, who's a Kannada poet, writer, translator, and a member of the Queer Poets Collective in Bangalore. His work spans literature, theatre, cinema, and poems, with poems and stories featured in leading Kannada publications. He's currently researching queer narratives in mythology and history. Thank you so much for being here. We also have Dr. Indira Chandrasekhar, who's a fiction writer, literary curator, and founder and principal editor of the award-winning literary journal Out of Print that publishes work bearing a connection to the Indian subcontinent. She has translated Dadapeer's award-winning short story collection, Neela Kurunji, from Kannada into English. Thank you both for being here. We're very happy to have you. Please, over to you.
Yes. Hi, everyone.
Hello, Mom. Hello, everyone.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you, IHS and City Scripts and Asha, for asking us. It's really nice. And I think this is a really important collective conversation, because how creative people explore the city in a sort of transitioning city, like all our Indian cities. But oh, hang on, James. I think Rumi's looking for his phone. Sorry, he's right there. Oh, but he's there looking for it. Sorry. Sorry. Sorry about that. Returning to the city. Yes, I think the thing about creative people exploring the city, creative people figuring out what the city is in this moment of transition, it's terribly important to explore that. So I also want to thank Dadapeer, because it's as an editor, I know that when you invest in somebody's writing and you start to think about another person's story, you get really involved in their writing. You become part of that narrative. But I think the next level, which is translating somebody's work, is entering their work at just another kind of level of intensity and involvement. And so thank you, Dadapeer, for this wonderful privilege of being able to translate your work and exercise my Kannada. So that was good. Right. So did you want to... well, I'm just going to ask you a question, since this is a conversation. So, Dadapeer, you've... since I translated Neela Kurunji, I thought we'd just kind of launch our conversation by talking about that. And so much of it is about an entry into the city. It's about a young person entering the city from a completely different world and engaging with the city. So do you want to talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, Mom. First of all, thanks so much, IHS, and thanks to you too, Mom. So coming back to the question, so I'm from a place called Hagari-Bommanhalli, which is in Ballari district. Now it is named as Vijayanagar district. And then I studied in a place called Dharwad. And then I moved to Bangalore. So to keep it simple, I only have the stories in these locations. So in my first collection, Neela Kurunji, I have say two kinds of stories, so which revolves around rural place and then in the city. So for me, always the city used to fascinate me, because I used to feel like the city gives the anonymity, because how in rural context, so it is very much evident that caste is very much evident, and the suffocations is very much evident, the patriarchal structures and all those things are very much evident. So I used to feel like somehow I have to escape from all of this. So I used to feel like, oh, so the city could be one great escape, or a great way to explore and find my dreams and a job and all that. So in that way, I moved to city immediately once I finished my master's in mathematics from Dharwad. So in that way, I have a stories which happens in Bangalore. Also, I have a story which happens in rural context. Also, I think that is a one.
So I guess later on in the conversation, I'll ask you whether you still feel that within the city you have that anonymity, and whether you feel that the patriarchy and etc. caste have are dissipated. Of course, they would be different from in rural India, but we'll get back to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Ma'am, I have one question. So if you could hold a Bangalore in a single metaphor, so what would it be?
You challenge me, Dadapeer, especially because I'm actually trying to move away from metaphors in my own writing, simply because I find that for me it becomes an easy way to not really explore something which is very difficult that I'm trying to examine. So I move. It's easy to say it was like chili on the tender skin or something like that, but you really want to explore what the pain was that the character is feeling, and so I kind of move away from metaphors. But I guess if I had to think about a metaphor for Bangalore, there are multiple metaphors or multiple layers in which I would think about it, and one would be kind of the geographic spread, and the other would be the kind of geographic sub-communities that form, but those are not just geographic but social and class and caste kind of related sub-communities that form. So I suppose you could think of, since I'm thinking you'll figure out that in the course of this conversation that much of my thinking these days in my writing is about water bodies. And so since we're thinking about water bodies, I'll move from inland water bodies to a sea water body. And I guess I would think about it as some kind of multi-armed sea creature, which has a center, but the center is morphing all the time and moving in different directions. But that's a bit maybe too sentimental for me, but anyway.
And I also want to know how Bangalore is different from other cities, because you have traveled the world, you lived in the other cities of India.
Yeah. It's actually very interesting. I think the last conversation I had for IIHS was with Annie Zaidi about her book, which was set in Mumbai and is very much a Mumbai city book. And the thing about much of the writing that takes place in a city like Bombay is connected to the trajectories that are through the city, the metro, the suburban train, and the ways of passage across the different regions of the city. And in Bangalore, we don't have the same kind of transitory feel, I mean, the metro is coming, but it's quite restricted. And also, in a sense, yes, it does connect the city, and it does take you from Yeshwanthpur to, Majestic to MG Road to South Bangalore and so on and so forth. But as yet, I think it hasn't yet developed, the transit systems haven't developed the mythology in a way that they have in a city like Bombay or Mumbai. So I think that is one thing that really stands out for me in the difference in the way in which you approach and write about the city. All cities have like this intensity though, and I think that is something when you read about stories from Delhi, for example, even though power structures in Delhi are so different, the ways in which people negotiate the landscape, the geography are so different. There's a kind of intensity of feeling that is not connected only to the familial or community experience the character is feeling, but also just the pressure of living in a multi-layered space. And there's also that strange alienation, I think, that many characters living in cities, that's something that's explored a lot, I think, in writing in the city. But now I'm going to ask you something. So Dadapeer, one of the things that you talked about was, the anonymity when you come into the city, and that anonymity is not just about caste and patriarchy, but also about sexuality and gender. And certainly those must be difficult things to explore in a rural or a small community environment. And in some of the stories in Neelakurinji, for example, you really explore those questions of subworlds, which are gay subworlds or urban subworlds, that explore, body shaming, the anxiety of being alone, the search for love, but all of them are very much set in the city. They are, and in this city. So would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think every human being will be in search of their reflection. So, like, okay, where are these people who exactly looks like me? Like, who exactly thinks like me? Who, like, whose orientation is as similar as me? Like, who? So, in that quest, city actually helps a lot, because city has a lot of options, and no one will question, because we'll be far away from our native and all that. So in my case also it is similar, because okay, once I came to city, I knew that okay, now I'm free in some sense. Okay, now only I have to do is, like, I have to search a job, or I have to pursue my dreams, and I have to find some support spaces. Okay, what are those support spaces and community spaces, or friendly spaces, who say, where I can share my thoughts, or where I can be myself, without any mask and without any filters before talking, without any, So even in Bangalore, the workspace, doesn't allow, because back once I came to Bangalore, I started teaching mathematics in different schools and colleges. So, as we know that, okay, most of the, except international schools and colleges, most of the private institutions are like too much of moralistic and patriarchal and right wing ideology oriented. In that, say, in those spaces, though we speak English, so we have to, filter our talks, and, like, all those things will be there. So in this, one more suffocative structures within Bangalore, I felt like, okay, writing is the only thing, where I can find myself, where I can express myself. In that way, my writing journey started, because I never thought like I would, okay, one day I would become a writer, because I came to Bangalore to become a TV anchor. So because I did my mathematics, and then I came here, I thought like, okay, chalo, so evening I'll teach, so I was teaching mathematics for diploma college in evening college. Then I tried, but I couldn't, because I was having issues with my body, and I was not that confident. But so all these things actually made me to write. So first thing I wrote was a poetry, then stories started. Then somewhere in me I felt like, oh, I can tell stories in my own way. So I don't know how better I answered your question.
I have to say that really the stories. What's very interesting is the stories that are set. That way you're looking back at your rural, semi-rural native place, and which are looking into life in the city and moving through the city. It's very interesting, the kind of intimacy here and the kind of exploration here are very different in I mean, it's still your voice, but the language is in itself very different. The intimacy of family life and the complexity of those stories in your native place, as opposed to the way in which you write about the urban environment and other environments where you are really exploring the identities that people are dealing with. So yeah.
Yeah, and also So one major challenge in being a urban writer or writer who is handling this urban stories and urban emotions in urban setting is a language, because I wrote stories from my native, from my hometown, from my family, from my friends' stories and all. So there, the language is the key, because I cannot imagine my rural stories without a dialect of Kannada, because I'm from Ballari. So obviously, when I write something in stories, so that automatically comes in my stories or essays or something. But whenever I go to write about Bangalore, so in stories, then the biggest challenge is language, because we have a different language. So we have Tamil, we have Telugu. Say even in this room, so we have people who speaks Telugu, Tamil, and Malayalam, and English and Kannada. So is it possible to capture the intensity or the people's feeling in its totality? So when this language barrier flows, so through language and through migration and through their dreams and desire, say if I use a simple English, if I use a common readable Kannada, so my question will be, so will I be successful if I just use a readable Kannada? So by using that language, will I be successful in so putting across people's emotion in its totality? So those are the minute challenges I think every urban writer who's writing in their native language faces, because English is a very common language, because everybody understands it. Say in English, okay, I do that and I do this. So but in Kannada, it's not the same way. So those are the things I.
Actually, that's a very good point you raise, particularly in the context of Bangalore, because I think Bangalore being, as many people have said over the years, because of its location and its history over the last centuries, is such a cosmopolitan place. Cosmopolitan meaning a polyglottic place. Everyone is speaking multiple languages. Sub areas have different languages, and I understand your challenge of dealing with that in Kannada, though you've managed to get it across. I mean, in your story, Yellow Yellow, you do have the Tamil voice coming of the character. But it's very challenging in English too, actually. And so, in fact, while translating your work, it was extremely challenging how to deal with the Bellari dialect without, you can't put it into some kind of pidgin English. It doesn't work. It doesn't sound right, because that's not what it is. So, English has its challenges that way also.
Now I'll ask a question to you. So how has Bangalore come across in your writing? And also, so you're the editor of Out of Print magazine for so many, I think more than 25 years.
15.
15 years.
So you have Dadapeer.
So you have curated stories from various backgrounds. So how do these narratives contribute to the collective memory of urban spaces like Bangalore? So in your writing and in the stories you curate and edit and.
So actually, it's very interesting. We get a lot of submissions. I thought about this question a little bit because obviously we'd had some, sort of discussion on what we wanted to talk about. And I'm going to talk also about a lot of the stories which we don't actually accept for publication, but stories that have come to us as submissions. And one of the things that happens is stories respond very much. There's a sort of a wave of responding to political events and situations and what's going on. You'll see at the time of 377, there was a lot of queer stories that came our way. Abrogation of 370, a lot of Kashmiri writers were submitting, and actually it was very challenging because we couldn't reach them back again because the internet had been cut off there. And so if we edited it, we didn't know whether they accepted the edits or not, and so on. And so in the same way, for a city like Bangalore, we have received so many submissions from techies. We have all of these young people who are obviously working in call centers or in the tech industry in this very isolated, alienated kind of spaces. Their social engagement is the mall. It's like transportation by bus or auto or whatever means, and then there's the mall, and then there's love, but the love is is unrealized love. It's like imagined love, or it's like sitting in a mall and observing the person whom you're in love with, but you don't know at all, and it's a strange kind of, we have so many of these kinds of stories that come to us that really reflect the city. And so I think it's not just the stories we've published, but also the stories that we don't accept sometimes for all kinds of complicated reasons, which have enriched my idea as an editor and a writer of what people are thinking about, and so that's been very profound actually for me. So yeah.
If you can read some excerpt from
You want to go first or shall I? Well, I'm going to be reading something which is a little bit long. So if anyone gets tired of it, just put your hands up and say stop, and I can cut off in the middle also. But the story I'm reading from is very much about the city of Bangalore in transition, because I think the one thing that we all recognize is that, you go to a certain area and it's just completely dug up and transformed in a relatively short period of time. So the city is going through a lot of transition. But I'm also particularly reading about not the central part of the city, not Bangalore Cant or Jayanagar or Malleshwaram, etc., but moving north into the new developments of the city. So I'm reading a little bit about that. And as you already might have gathered, I'm a little bit obsessed with what happens with the water bodies in the city, because they are just eroded and go through these transitions which are unjust, really, one can say, to the environment. And so that's what I'm reading about. And I'm going to read a section which is not too many characters in it. It's really about the character observing these transitions. So the story is called Aqua Vita, which means, of course, water life, I suppose. I had stopped stepping outside the property. I just could not bear seeing the way the area was changing as the city crept towards the north. The fields turned into residential colonies with sharply inscribed streets, trees hacked down to build small housing enclaves, the lake eroded and transformed. The latest effort of the municipality was to gentrify the lake shore, turn it into a park. Cemented walkways with neat borders, the gardener reported on a regular basis, plant beds in straight lines, play areas with bright plastic equipment. His daily route to the rambling cultivations on my property took him past the demarcations on the water's edge. His morning report was my sole connection almost to the neighborhood, and it was through his eyes that I saw the growing middle-class residential suburb that was engulfing the lake. Even though I mourned the old watery terrain, if I were to be honest, that untamed incarnation of the lake had already been destroyed when people began to move into the area and toss their rubbish along the water. The detritus of my neighbors' lives was full of polymeric material of the most indestructible kind, material that held various bodily excretions forever, even while they leached destructive chemicals steadily into the water. I could not bear to think of all the creatures of the lake trying to make sense of the toxification, and much preferred to imagine the lake as it had been before, its uneven boundaries rich with reeds and rushes, wet and beautiful and filled with life. I woke one morning to a roaring and shaking, industrial and rough. Machines were being transported down our little lane that led to the lake. Compound walls were knocked down as the vehicles passed, and branches of the trees that lined my property were torn off. The sound was so loud it shook the glass in the windows. The television had been full of news of giant machines crushing whole sections of cities, sometimes in war, sometimes in peace as fancy new neighborhoods sprung up. I crouched in the inner hall, my hands over my head, compelling my limbs to remember sprint positions from high school in case I needed to flee. By the time the gardener arrived, I was screaming and trembling. "What is happening?" I asked over and over again. "It's nothing, Ma, nothing," he repeated till I calmed down. Nothing? It was something. But he could not tell me what was happening. All he knew was that the equipment was being unloaded along the shore of the lake. In time, it became clear that the city builders had found the lake. They were digging and flattening and trying to fill in the water basin to reclaim the land and lay out gated communities and erect apartment complexes. The local onslaught of daily household rubbish that had sullied the area and driven me into retreat seemed like nothing in comparison to the garbage and construction debris that they brought in truckloads from all over the city and dumped in the water. There was little hope left at that point for our aquatic subworld, that wild subcosmos of our neighborhood. If one thought about it in that context, the current plan of clean and gentrify to preserve what was left of the lake body was perhaps not such a bad thing. I finally acquired enough courage to venture out to the newly laid park. Very clean, rubbish all cleared, the gardener assured me every day, encouraging me to step out. The garbage and demolition waste had not actually disappeared, I found, but had simply been pushed back behind the green chain link fence that was cordoning off the lake park in an orderly curve. Beyond it, rubbish of every kind, pressed down and compacted, was packed into the long, undulating outer lobes of the lake, squeezing the water out. One day, it started to rain. About a month into the deluge, the bed of debris over the lake began to sink, and the municipality moved into action. Giant cranes arrived to dismantle the clusters of illegal shanties built on the landfill. I drove as fast as I could to the lake, parking haphazardly as everyone else had done on the edge of the road. People screaming and calling were exploding onto the landfill from their homes, breaching the fence, running hither and thither. Children dashed at the municipal workers, plucking at their legs, tossing stones at the lathi-wielding police, darting in and beating at the bodies of the cranes with sticks and plastic poles and broom handles and whatever else they could find in the urban detritus they lived on. As the cranes closed in on them, they huddled together, a wailing mass of flailing limbs. Unable to take the weight of the machines, cracks began to develop in the landfill. Before our eyes, the dust began to rise along the cracks, making the air hazy. Then, large blocks of packed material began to break away from the hole. A great shout went out as the first bit, an unevenly edged trapezium about 6 by 10 feet, separated and turned onto its side. Even from afar, we could see it floating and moving around a little before starting to sink. The crane nearest us tipped forward, its immense excavating claws swinging wildly downwards. The driver leapt out and disappeared into the crowd of people sandwiched between the lake and the passing traffic. I'd worked my way to the front of the crowd and stood on the trampled remnants of the municipality's western fence. The group jostled forward when the city buses trundled past in fogs of black fumes, and backwards when more chunks of pressed landfill fell into the water. Clouds of toxic particles rose before every messy splash, filling the air with a fine-grained acrid powder that got washed down by the rain. As the throng grew, I was being pushed forward like some great slug creature. The mass of human beings of which I was a part oozed to the right to avoid being sucked into the water. Soon, I was almost on the cranes. That's when I spotted Shashikala. My panic dissipated and I stood still and watched. She must have been standing on a small rise because I could see her clearly above the others. Or perhaps she stood out because, unlike everyone else, who was weighed down by bundles of belongings tied in cloth or stuffed in lumpy knapsacks, she was carrying what seemed like an absolute forest of leafy, densely branched rosebush-like plants. She seemed to beckon to me, and the plants moved as if one with her as she gesticulated. As I started to move towards her, she appeared to sink a little. Suddenly, the entire knoll on which she stood, with what seemed like 40 others, moved and warbled, and people began shrieking and calling, and before I knew it, she and everyone else who was there was gone into the water.
Thank you, Mom.
Thank you. So maybe we'll talk a little so we don't go straight into another reading. That was quite long. So mine was prose and Dadapeer is exploring other forms. Yeah, so speaking of other forms, Dadapeer, in your new collection, which I have just about begun to translate, you really are exploring a lot of different forms. And I know that's because you're consciously thinking about literature. You know, your first collection shows this entry into the city being hit by, you know, the experience of transition and then writing. So I'm just curious about these other forms because you're consciously thinking about literature. It's through the literary world that opened up to you in the city, right? That you've responded to this. Yeah. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
About my second collection and the stories.
Yeah, just that you're exploring different forms because you've been really steeped in the literary world of the city, and that triggers in you the desire to look at different ways of exploring story.
So first, I came to know about Bangalore in writing is from Girish Karnad's Bendakalu on Toast. So I attended the reading of the play when I was in Dharwad. So the first time I heard about Bangalore in a writing form. So by Girish Karnad. So that to Bendakalu on Toast, and later in Kannada, I read few books about Bangalore in a series by Jogi, and then there's a writer called Meghana Surendra who wrote about Bangalore, which actually traces about the historical and evolutionary traces of Bangalore. So all these things, and also this is the only city I've been living here. I think more than 8 years, and I haven't been to other cities and stayed for more than 15 days or 20 days. So Bangalore is really close to my heart because it gave me job, it gave me friends, and it gave me shelter and all that. So I usually do look forward to the other forms of literature, be it translation and be it the essays and poetry, or even I'm also looking forward to the dramaturgy and say directing a play. So I always look forward to how city is being interpreted by other writers when I'm reading. So, or else, like even I'm writing my own story, even if there is one short reference about the city, so I always feel like excited. Oh, say here city comes. So how can I, or what part of a city, or what characters of the city, or like where do they belong? Like how did they come here? So all those things really, makes me happy and makes me to take care a lot when it is coming in my writing. And in my second collection, I think it's almost similar to my first collection, a little bit more complex and dark, if I say, because I want to explore Bangalore through people's eyes. So through people's memories, desires, and dreams. So not only a physical spaces, but their through their memory landscape and dream landscape. So I think for me that makes a Bangalore, because every day so many people comes to Bangalore either in search of job or to fulfill their dreams, especially when they are from middle class or lower middle class. So they don't have a desire to explore city step by step. Okay, let's go Lal Bagh, and because for them, finding a job, will be the first priority. Of course, okay, once they find a job 9 to 5, slavery will take over. Even if it is unorganized sector to gone case, so they hardly get Sundays. So in that very short span of time considered, so what Bangalore they explore. So what exactly makes them to explore the Bangalore? So either it is meeting friends, or going to the spaces, or knowing about the spaces, its history and all. So I think these things makes me really interested, and also how city treats them, or vice versa. So I feel like city for me is like a kaleidoscope. So any person who sees into the kaleidoscope we'll see a different pattern altogether. Even the same person sees for the second time again, he sees a different pattern, and also vice versa. So Bangalore also offers every time, for every people it offers a different pattern. So depending on their location, it could be language location or migration or so many things. So only because I think because of this reason only, we all are able to love Bangalore in our own ways, to make connection Bangalore with the Bangalore in our own ways, I guess.
And hate Bangalore sometimes.
Yeah, for traffic.
Yes, Dadapeer, why don't you read a little bit? You've been thinking about lots of interesting things.
So this is essay I recently wrote and published. It's about the spaces. So here, at some point, obviously Bangalore comes in. So it's about. I'll just give you a brief because people who may not understand Kannada may get it easily. It's about how much of a space the city offers. When any person comes to Bangalore for the first time. So it's about that, and then it goes on and makes a commentary about Bangalore. So I'll just read from the in between paragraph. ಸೊ ಕೆಲಸ ಹುಡುಕಲು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿಗೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ಮಲ್ಲೇಶ್ವರಂನ ಸಂಪಿಗೆ ರಸ್ತೆಯ 13ನೇ ಕ್ರಾಸಿನ 4ನೇ ಮಹಡಿಯಲ್ಲಿನ ಯಾವುದೋ ಮೆನ್ಸ್ PGಯಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಹಾಲನ್ನೇ ಕಟ್ಟಿಗೆಯ ಹಲಗೆಯಿಂದ ಬೇರ್ಪಡಿಸಿ ಮಾಡಿದ ರೂಮಿನ ಮೇಲಿನ ಬಂಕರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ನನಗೊಂದು ಜಾಗ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿತು. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರೆಂಬ ವಿಶಾಲ ಊರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ನಮಗೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟುಕೊಡುವ ಜಾಗದ ಜುಗ್ಗುತನ ನೋಡಿ ನನಗೆ ದಿಗಿಲಾಗಿತ್ತು. ಸಿನಿಮಾಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕಂಡಂತೆ ಯಾವುದೋ ಜೈಲರ್ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಕರೆದುಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಿ ಒಂದು ಜಾಗಕ್ಕೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬೆಡ್ ನಂಬರ್ ಹೇಳಿ ಹೋದಂತೆ ಆ PG ಓನರ್ ನನಗೆ ಕಂಡಿದ್ದರು. ಊರಿನಿಂದ ತಪ್ಪಿಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದ ಅಪರಾಧಿಯ ಭಾವ ಬಂದಿತ್ತೇನೋ ಆಗ, ನೆನಪಿಲ್ಲ ಈಗ. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನ ರಸ್ತೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅಡ್ಡಾಡುವಾಗ, ಉದ್ದೋದ್ದ ಬಿಲ್ಡಿಂಗುಗಳನ್ನು ತಲೆ ಎತ್ತಿ ನೋಡುವಾಗ, ಇವರೆಲ್ಲ ಯಾವಾಗ ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಬಂದರು? ಹೇಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ದೊಡ್ಡ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಅರಮನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಕಟ್ಟಿಕೊಂಡರು? ಇಷ್ಟು ದುಡ್ಡು ಇವರಿಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಬಂತು ಎನಿಸುತ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಸರ್ಕಾರಿ ಆಸ್ಪತ್ರೆಯ ಜನರಲ್ ವಾರ್ಡಿನ ಹಾಗಿರುವ PGಯ ಬೆಡ್ಡುಗಳು ಒಮ್ಮೆ ರೂಢಿಯಾಗಿ ಬಿಟ್ಟರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಒಗ್ಗಿಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಿಬಿಡುತ್ತೇವೆ. ರೂಢಿಯೇ ಹಾಗಲ್ಲವೇ? ಒಮ್ಮೆ ಹೈದರಾಬಾದ್ ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯೋತ್ಸವಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗುವ ಮುನ್ನಾ ದಿನ MG ರೋಡಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯ ಅಪಾರ್ಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ನಲ್ಲಿರುವ ನನ್ನ ಕವಿಗೆಳೆಯನ ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ರಾತ್ರಿ ಉಳಿದು ಬೆಳಗಿನ ಜಾವ 4ಕ್ಕೆ ವಿಮಾನ ನಿಲ್ದಾಣಕ್ಕೆ ಹೊರಡುವುದು ಎಂದು ನಿರ್ಧರಿಸಿದ್ದೆ. ಸೊ ಹಾಲಿನಲ್ಲಿರುವ ಸೋಫಾದ ಮೇಲೆ ಮಲಗುತ್ತೇನೆ ಎಂದು ನಿರ್ಧರಿಸಿದರೂ ಒಂದು ಕ್ಷಣವೂ ಕಣ್ಣಿಗೆ ನಿದ್ದೆ ಹತ್ತದೆ ಒದ್ದಾಡಿದ್ದೆ. ಇದ್ದಕ್ಕಿದ್ದಂತೆ ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ವಿಶಾಲ ಜಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಲಗುವುದು ಹೇಗೆ ಎಂದು ದಿಗಿಲಾಗಿತ್ತು. ಮರುದಿನ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಹ್ಯಾಂಗೋವರಿನ ಕಿರಿಕಿರಿಯಂತಹ ತಲೆನೋವಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮಂಪರು ನಿದ್ದೆಯಲ್ಲಿಯೇ ದಿನ ಕಳೆದೆ. ಊರು ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಶಹರಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದವರ ಜಾಗದ ಜೊತೆಗಿನ ಗುದ್ದಾಟಗಳು ಅಂಥದ್ದೇ ಕಿರಿಕಿರಿಯನ್ನು ಹೊಂದಿರುತ್ತವೆ ಎನಿಸುತ್ತದೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ನಡೆದ ಗುದ್ದಾಟವೆಂದರೆ, ಒಂದಷ್ಟು ಜಾಗಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರನ್ನೂ ಬಿಟ್ಟುಕೊಳ್ಳದ ಅಭೇದ್ಯ ಕೋಟೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇವಲ ಪ್ರಾಮಾಣಿಕತೆ ಮತ್ತು ಪ್ರತಿಭೆಯ ಕಾರಣದಿಂದ ಮಾತ್ರ ಪ್ರವೇಶ ಪಡೆಯುವುದು ಹೇಗೆ ಎಂಬುದು. ಆ ಜಾಗಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಮಗೆ ಪ್ರವೇಶವಿರುತ್ತದೆಯೇ? ನಾವು ಉಡುವ ಬಟ್ಟೆಗಳು, ನಮ್ಮ ಬಣ್ಣ, ಲಾಲಿತ್ಯವಿಲ್ಲದ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಭಾಷೆ, ಜಾತಿ, ವರ್ಗದ ಕಾರಣಗಳಿಂದಾಗಿ ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಸದಾ ಅಳೆಯುತ್ತಿರುತ್ತಾರೆಯೇ? ಅಥವಾ ಇವೆಲ್ಲ ನನ್ನ ಊಹೆಯ ಕಾರಣದಿಂದ ಮಾತ್ರ ಹುಟ್ಟಿದ ಭಯಗಳೇ? ಅದಷ್ಟೇ ಆಗಿರಲಾರದು ಎನ್ನುವುದು ನನ್ನ ಈಗಿನ ಗಟ್ ಫೀಲಿಂಗ್. ಒಂದೊಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಗಳಿಗೆ ಹೋಗುವ ಮುಂಚಿನ ಅರ್ಧ ತಾಸು ಯೋಚನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮುಳುಗೆದ್ದು ಧೈರ್ಯ ತಂದುಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಅವು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಗಳಷ್ಟೇ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಸ್ನೇಹದ ತಾಣಗಳು, ಪ್ರೇಮ ಸಂಬಂಧಗಳು ಇತ್ಯಾದಿ ಇಂಟಿಮೇಟ್ ಜಾಗ ಮತ್ತು ಸಂದರ್ಭಗಳಲ್ಲಿಯೂ ತಮ್ಮದೇ ಚಮತ್ಕಾರ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಡುತ್ತವೆ. ಇದು ಕೇವಲ ಸ್ವರತಿಯ ಲಹರಿಯಲ್ಲ. ಹಳ್ಳಿಗಳನ್ನು ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಪೇಟೆಗೆ ಬಂದು ಅವಕಾಶಗಳಿಗಾಗಿ, ಜ್ಞಾನದ ಜಾಗಗಳಿಗಾಗಿ ಹುಡುಕುತ್ತಾ ಒಂಟಿಯಾಗಿ ಚಲಿಸುವ, ಅಲೆದಾಡುವ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಪಾಡೂ ಆಗಿ ನನಗೆ ಕಾಣಿಸುತ್ತದೆ. ಈ ಎಲ್ಲದರ ನಡುವೆ ನನ್ನ ಬಡತನವನ್ನು, ಗಾಯಗಳನ್ನು ಯಾವೊಂದೂ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೆ ಹರಾಜಿಗೆ, ಮುಲಾಜಿಗೆ, ಮುಂದಿನವರ ಉದಾರ ಕರುಣೆಗೆ ಹರಾಜಿಗೆ ಇಡಲಾರೆ ಎನ್ನುವ ಆತ್ಮಾಭಿಮಾನ ಕಣ್ಣಲ್ಲಿ ನೀರು ತರಿಸಿದ್ದೂ ಇದೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ಕಣ್ಣಲ್ಲಿ ನೀರು ತರಿಸಿದ ಮತ್ತೊಂದು ಘಟನೆ ಎಂದರೆ, ಕೋವಿಡ್ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಬರಿಗಾಲಲ್ಲಿ ಊರು ತಲುಪಬೇಕೆಂದು ತಾವಿದ್ದ ತಾವುಗಳನ್ನು ತೊರೆದು ಊರು ತಲುಪುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ವಲಸೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಹೆಜ್ಜೆಗಳು. ಪೇಟೆಯೊಂದು ತಣ್ಣಗೆ ತಟ್ಟೆ ಬಡಿತದ ಹಿಮ್ಮೇಳದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರನ್ನು ಅಳುತ್ತಾ ಸರ್ಕಾರದ ಮತ್ತು ವಿಧಿಯ ಕ್ರೌರ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಮೂಕ ಸಾಕ್ಷಿಯಾದ ಹೊತ್ತಾಗಿ ಆ ದೃಶ್ಯಗಳು ನನಗೆ ಕಂಡಿದೆ. ಆ ಹೊತ್ತು ಪೇಟೆಯ ಬಿಕೋ ಎನ್ನುವ ಬೀದಿಗಳು ಅನಾಥವಾಗಿ ನರಳಿವೆ. ಪೇಟೆಯ ಜಾಗಗಳು ಖಿನ್ನವಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತೆ ಎದ್ದು ಬಂದಿವೆ. ನಿಮ್ಮ ಜಾಗ ಇದಲ್ಲ ಎಂದು ಸಾಕ್ಷಿ ಕೇಳಿದ ಘನ ಸರ್ಕಾರಗಳು ಅದೆಷ್ಟೋ ಅಲ್ಪಸಂಖ್ಯಾತರ ಮೆದುಳುಗಳಿಗೆ ನನ್ನ ಜಾಗ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಎನ್ನುವ ಭಾವ ಮೂಡಿಸಿವೆ. ನೆಲಕುಸಿಯೇ ಪದವಿಲ್ಲಿ ಎಂಬ ಭಾವ ಮೂಡಿಸಿವೆ. ಈ ಕುರಿತಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತು ಇಂತಹ ಅದೆಷ್ಟೋ ಹೋರಾಟಗಳಿಗೆ ಜಾಗವಾಗಿದ್ದ ಟೌನ್ ಹಾಲನ್ನು ಹೋರಾಟದ ಜಾಗದಿಂದ ರದ್ದು ಮಾಡಿ ಯಾರೂ ನೋಡದ ಫ್ರೀಡಮ್ ಪಾರ್ಕ್ ಅಂತ ಎಸೆದಾಗ ಹೋರಾಟದ ಕ್ರಾಂತಿಯ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಯ ಸೊಲ್ಲುಗಳು ಗಾಳಿಯಲ್ಲೇ ಕಳೆದು ಹೋಗುವಂತೆ ಮಾಡಿವೆ. So I think for me, so not only the physical spaces like Lal Bagh and Banegata National Park and Cubbon Park and any of these spaces make city. I think for me, the collectives also makes the city. The alternative collectives also make a city, and resistance spaces also makes a city. So in that way, also art spaces and the cultural spaces makes the city, and the community spaces make the city, and the friendships we make in the city also makes a city. So I just wrote one short poem when during COVID time, how the city treated or how people might have felt about the city. All this the workers who are leaving the city. It's a very short poem. ಕತ್ತಲು, ಕೆಂಡದ ಹಾದಿ, ಬರಿಗಾಲು, ಅಟ್ಟಿಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಬರುವ ಅದೃಶ್ಯ ಅಲೆ, ಉಳಿಯುವುದಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ದಿಕ್ಕೆಟ್ಟು ಓಡುವ ಚಿತ್ರಗಳು, ಬ್ಯಾಗಿನೊಳಗಡೆ ಒಂದೆರಡು ಜೊತೆ ಬಟ್ಟೆ, ಭರವಸೆಗಿರಲಿ ಎಂದು ಎದೆಯ ಜೋಳಿಗೆಯಲ್ಲೊಂದು ಪುಟ್ಟ ದೇವರು, ದಾರಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಹಸಿವಾದರೆ ಒಂದೆರಡು ಪಾರ್ಲೇಜಿ, ನಡಿಗೆ ನ ಡಿ ಗೆ, ಕನಸುಗಳ ಕೈ ಹಿಡಿದು ಊರ ಮನೆಗೆ ಬೆನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿ ನಗರದ ಉದರದೊಳಗೆ ಬಂದು ಸೇರಿದಾಗ ನಮ್ಮ ನಿದ್ರೆಗೆ ಸಲ್ಲಬೇಕಾದ ಒಂದಷ್ಟು ಕತ್ತಲನ್ನು ದಯಪಾಲಿಸುತ್ತಾ ಮಡಿಲಲ್ಲಿ ಮಲಗಿಸಿ ತಟ್ಟುತ್ತಾ ಜೋಗುಳ ಹಾಡುತ್ತಿತ್ತು ನಗರ ಇಲ್ಲಿಯವರೆಗೂ. ನಗರದ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬಿದ್ದವರು ನಾವು, ನಮಗೆ ಈ ಮಹಾನಗರವೇ ಮನೆಯಾಗಿತ್ತು. ಯಾವುದೋ ಕುದಿ ಬಿಂದುವಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಬಿಲದಿಂದ ಮಾಯವಾಗುವ ಘಳಿಗೆ, ಮಹಾಮಾರಿ ಆವರಿಸಿದೆ ಊರ ತುಂಬ. ನಗರಕ್ಕೀಗ ಕರುಣೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ನಮ್ಮ ನಡಿಗೆಯ ಹೆಜ್ಜೆ ಸಪ್ಪಳಕ್ಕೆ ತಟ್ಟೆ ಬಡಿತದ ಹಿನ್ನೆಲೆ ಸಂಗೀತ ಕೊಡುತ್ತಿದೆ. ಬಹುಶಃ ಅದು ನಗರದ ರೋದನೆ ಇರಬಹುದು. ಪ್ರಿಯ ಮಹಾನಗರವೇ, ಸಾಧ್ಯವಾದರೆ ಭರವಸೆಗೆಂದು ನೀನೇ ಹಚ್ಚಿಟ್ಟ ದೀಪದ ಬೆಳಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಹೆಜ್ಜೆ ಗುರುತುಗಳ ವಾಸನೆ ನೋಡು. ನಮ್ಮ ವಿದಾಯದ ನೋವು ನಿನಗೆ ತಾಗುತ್ತದೆ. ಈ ಮಹಾನ್ ವಲಸೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೆಯುತ್ತಾ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಕಾಲುಗಳು ಕುಸಿದವು. ಕೆಲವು ಹೆಜ್ಜೆ ಗುರುತುಗಳು ಮಧ್ಯದಲ್ಲೇ ಮಾಯವಾದವು. ಅವರು ಅರ್ಧ ಕಟ್ಟಿದ ಅಪಾರ್ಟ್ಮೆಂಟುಗಳು ಪೂರ್ಣಗೊಳ್ಳುವ ಆಸೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬಿಕ್ಕಳಿಸಿದವು. ಹಸಿವು ಮಾಯವಾದವರ ಶಾಪದ ಫಲದಿಂದ ನಗರಕ್ಕೆ ಅಜೀರ್ಣದ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ. ನಗರಗಳೀಗ ನಿದ್ರಿಸುವುದಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದರ ಬೆಳಕುಗಳು ಸದಾ ಎಚ್ಚರವಿರುತ್ತವೆ. ಮುನಿಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಮನೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೋದ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಮತ್ತೆ ಮರಳಿ ಬರುವಾಗ ದಾರಿ ನಿಚ್ಚಳ ಕಾಣಲೆಂದು. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
Thank you, Dadapeer. Actually, when you were reading that poem and also the essay before that, I thought to myself about the loneliness that hits you if you're coming into a space like a city, and how wise you were and how lucky you were to be able to build community, because otherwise you're entering the place and you have these hopes and dreams, you have this idea that you'll find a way, and then you're on your own, and how isolating that can be. So yeah, so lucky to have found community. Yeah. Should we open up to questions now, maybe, and then we can kind of address other stuff as we go along. If anyone has a question.
Thank you for the talk, Jaiman. Just an observation, it's not a question. I gave a talk at IISc in 2012, I think. The title of the talk was How Green Was My Valley. So I've been living in the city since 75, age 5. On and off. The talk talked about places which were lakes in Bangalore converted into non-lakes. Majestic bus stand, Kantirwa Stadium. That entire area where today Alliance Française is located, opposite Cantonment Station. That's why it's called Miller's Tank Bund Road. That used to be a lake. IIHS, no, it wasn't a lake earlier. It was Microsoft Research Lab. But I don't know if it was a lake before Microsoft Research Lab. People at IIHS who've been around before 2003 might be able to tell me. Anyway, that was a bit of a joke. So many places in Bangalore which were lakes. Kere ettu adu convert agide. Now with, as she said, with the coming of post-COVID, there has been a whole influx of people towards the north of Bangalore. Jakkur Lake is in danger of getting converted. Environmentalists are, I think, putting a stop to that. I stay in Sahakar Nagar. Right next to me is GKVK. There was a plan to cut a road through GKVK to connect Vidyaranyapura to Bellary Road. Thankfully, some people protested and it didn't happen. But number of trees at GKVK were cut down since Krishi Mela started.
No, truly, the Bangalore city is going through this environmental destruction on an order which is terrifying. And I think the lakes were such an integral part of keeping the city alive. And who knows what this dystopian future holds for us as we erode all of those spaces. So, yeah, thank you for that comment and reminding us that so many of the spaces that we now take for granted as urban spaces were actually water bodies. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I'll just respond. I'll just add to one point. So I was doing a fellowship in an organization called Samada. So the organization works on the themes like social inclusion, pluralism, and environmental protection, and gender equality, and self in society, all those things, and which works on youth between 18 to 31 years old. So there, the environment, the landscape of Bangalore, like how it has been, as Sir pointed out. What Rishabhavati we have in Bangalore, and so what is the role of youth and role of people, like say our common people. So do we have to protect the green Bangalore, so which we used to have one time. Now it is gradually depleting, as it is very, very much evidently we heard from ma'am's story, and Sir made a remark. So I think this the sense, the point I'm making is like, okay, what do we do? So this question of what do we do to save the green part of the Bangalore, the green landscape of Bangalore, being a citizens, being a responsible, citizens of Bangalore. So this question also, so I used to observe even the students who used to visit the organization, and used to have a, they used to do rallies and, give information, all those things. So I think, so now one point comes to my mind is like, being informed. Right, so being informed that Sir made, okay, so once upon a time the Majestic was a lake, used to be the lake, right? So so knowing the city and understanding those, what it was used to be, so the past of the city and the future, or our dream towards the city, our imagination towards the city is extremely important. So yeah, and so till then, so I was also like a 9-to-5 job and shifting the job and figuring it out, making money, how to make money and all this stuff. But recently I'm a part of a collective called Kavya Sanjay. So recently we did one project supported by IFA. So where we used to visit, visit the spaces of the city, either physical spaces or experiential spaces of Bangalore, and then respond to it through poetry. So it was like an exciting activity, because only that made me to visit those spaces. Otherwise, we'll be in our cocoon and like comfort zone, all those things, right? So it's like, I don't know, everybody used to get that privilege of getting a grant and going to this thing, one. So I don't know way to make connections. No, say anyone and everyone who comes to the city. So do they make some time, or so whether the circumstances allows them to experience Bangalore, or to know about Bangalore, to have information about Bangalore. Now we have a lot of information about AI, even if you type hello. So which gives, so being informed and making time, where Narayan Murthy says work 17 hours, all those things. So I think we are all in a a pool of too much of information and cosmic consumerism and too much of distractions. So in their way to find a space and time to invest, to at least to think and being informed to city, I feel like everyone should have that privilege and time, or either they should make it or the time should give it to them.
Yeah.
So that everyone will be informed and at least know, and we can talk like the spaces like this.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bravo. Thank you for that. And I think it actually leads to another, I mean, I know you have a question, but it actually leads to another kind of small yet important point you make, which is embedded in there, which is that how are we using art and writing and creative endeavors to speak about the environment. These are small efforts, I know, and we can't stand in the way of the, road roller, but still, I think it's still critically important. Yeah. Anyway.
Hi. Thank you so much for the discussion so far. My question is about writing and your experience as writers. How do you experience the city in ways that have not yet been expressed? What I mean is, there are a lot of stereotyped visions about cities, especially cities like Bangalore, which have been covered in popular culture variously. So how do you reimagine your experiences of the city, in the city, differently and not let it become a trope?
Are you challenging our skills?
No, I want to learn more.
I think it kind of relates to the question that you had asked about what is the city that you're exploring, and who are the unspoken voices that you are. Yeah.
I think so. Anything and say anything we come across in our life. So, at the very important question is like what it evokes in us after seeing, or any sensory experience, like either by touch or seeing or hearing or anything. So, what it evokes in us. Say, even in the same the project which we were doing. Say, once we had been to the Tipu's fort. Okay, write a poem. See the write a poem. Obviously, one key is like, okay, go go around, read what has been written, when Tipu and how many pillars are there. So is it sufficient? So what it evokes, information is there. Okay, acha, chalo, I got information, because everybody sees it, right? So I think the main important thing is like what it evokes in us. Maybe the keys, at least now, what is coming to my mind is like we can enter it through loss, and then our memories and our imagination, and how that space is connecting to me, and finding a language when it because you asked a question about language, the right literature, right? So what language, or in what form it is coming across on my paper. Or sometimes I was interacting with one of my fellow writers. So that writer was saying, so writing is not about information. Writing is not only about the saying and experience. It's also about the language. So okay, again, what is about language? Is it only using the dialect which I used to, where people talk in my hometown? Is it sufficient? Hey, hogle, barle, apya. Is it sufficient? So does it make a literature? So I think, that writer, so she gave me an excellent, beautiful, maybe a key to enter. So she said like, you're not supposed to compromise towards the intensity of the language. So, because language comes to us, and words comes to us, and sentences comes to us, okay, till it, meets your standard or some intensity, because we get to know, oh, okay, now it's sufficient. Oh, now this is the sentence I was looking for. So maybe those are the things where we can go around about, okay, whenever we are writing about the city, because we have information about the city, like, okay, now we can search about any city in our fingertips in our AI. So, but when we hear about the city, it's not like, oh, because now I may not be able to travel Delhi in my lifetime, because I may not stay, but even when we hear about the Delhi, and so what picture which gives us, maybe those are the keys which is coming to my mind right now.
Yeah, and I think also, there's, when you're writing, at least in fiction, when you're writing a story, it's always the balance between the internal and the external, right? And of course, I mean, this all sounds very cliched, but the point is that really you have to think about how the environment is affecting the character who's in the story. And you have to push it to the edge, actually. You have to push a sort of a psychological push it to a sort of a psychological edge to examine who this character is and why then the city has affected them that way. Obviously, you don't need to state it. It's not an essay or a journalistic examination. But in this story, for example, the one which I'm working on and thinking about a lot, because it's a story that I've been writing for a very long time. I keep returning to it. And because I feel very deeply about the destruction of this lake that's quite close to where we are, I keep returning to this story. And but it wasn't quite right. And the thing is, that's because you have to keep going back and really saying, am I just, talking about the story, city in transition, hundreds of people are talking about it. But then you have to say what's happening to this character, why is she pushed out of her comfort zone into some kind of a bizarre situation that she loses control of what happens, So in a way, that's, I think, how I'm trying to work with this. Yeah.
And also finding a metaphors along with what ma'am said, going deep into the characters or within ourselves. I think finding a metaphors or right metaphors to describe city or emotion or experience or whatever might help, because obviously metaphors either come from our memories, either come from our imagination or dreams or whatever, because I think the metaphors are markers of the intensity, like how much baby I love you, how much you love me. Tell me the metaphor. No, so I think metaphors can also become, because in my recent essay I was writing and I found out oh wow, metaphors are a very good way to communicate about writing a city.
It's very interesting how both of you talk about metaphors, like having two different standpoints. While one does access or wants to access a lot of metaphors and exploring metaphors, and you say it is not needed.
Not that it's not needed, but I think I exercise restraint. It's, for me, it becomes too easy a way out,
So just now, for the question that you asked, I think Dada has written a very interesting sightseeing Kavya Sanjay project. I think you should talk about the Basava. That's the most beautiful example one which you can quote about.
Yeah, I'll just talk about it because there's which temple is that? Dodda Basavana Gudi, the Basavan Gudi temple. I think it's also connected to the forms of writing. So we went there and we have to write. At least we have to respond. There was no compulsion. I have to be clear about it. But I have to respond to it. So what it evokes within me was I thought I can write one children poem about Basava and then Basavi and okay, Basava is there and then, Basava's mother was Basavi. Then later it became a controversy saying you cannot use Basavi word because it is a historical thing. About they used to use the word, Basavi for sex workers in Devadasi community. But we also had, in a rural thing Kukkara Basava, Kore Basava, all those things, at least it made an allude to that. Led to the conversations about the words. It was really interesting. So the point was so at least exploring cities also gave me a strength to explore the forms to try at least different forms.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you both. Mine's not very far from her question, but I'm curious as to how you move around the city, because I feel like it's become harder to move around the city and therefore it's become harder to stumble upon things. And it almost feels like we've outsourced exploration to our maps, to Tindi walks and to, we're listicles. So how do you just go around and see things?
I'm... now that I've become an old fuddy-duddy, I have to say that I no longer walk around the city. I'm just using comfort. But I am reminded of a piece of writing by Nancy Arajania where she talks about walking through the city, and then you are a great walker, and I think by walking through a city or a space, you really you're an observer. You're distanced, you're passing through, you're a transient, and yet your level of observation allows you to pause, stop, engage, move away. And those were the ways we explored. It's very true. And it's very true that in the age of technology, we don't do that anymore. And but I think that for me, it's very much even in transition in a vehicle or a public transportation, something catches your eye. So I lived in Mumbai for a long time, and I was in a taxi, and then you're at the traffic light, and it's under this huge big underpass, and you see a family living there, and that just completely triggered a story for me. So yes, exploring the city has changed, and we no longer engage maybe at least I no longer engage on a foot level, pedestrian level. But I think that stories for me are often triggered just by a visual also, and so there is that. Yeah.
For me to so far I changed a lot of jobs, and because I used to be the teacher, then I shifted to serials, and then now I'm doing research. Maybe through this different the working spaces also leave something about the city, and something about that sector, something about the people working there, something about how they look in a look into the city, and how they respond to the city through their work. Right? And that is one thing, because that also says a lot of things about the city space and working space, and how the people are, and how they have the mindset towards the city's landscape and city's development and all. So far so good. And also that reminds me about talking about the walking. I have my first story, my first collection. Even I used to feel like there's one line I still remember. ನಾವು ನಡೆಯದೆ ಹೋದರೆ ಯಾವ ದಾರಿಗಳು ನಮ್ಮದಾಗುವುದಿಲ್ಲ. Because in walking we actually have a lot of say all senses working, right? So because if we use the other means of transport, yes we do, but some things we miss. And also, having said that, all sorts of transport adds something, and takes out something from us.
I guess the other way I just want to toss in is that is conversations, actually. It's conversations with just random people that you end up having.
Thanks. Hi. Since I know you both well, I'm going to take the liberty of being very open-ended in my question. It's about identity, and maybe express it in different ways. So in general, because the subject is about writing and the city, sort of generally, how does your self-identity of being a Bangalorean, a new Bangalorean or an old Bangalorean, not old, not an old Bangalorean, how does that influence if it does at all, how does that influence your writing? And kind of along the lines of that, having multiple identities, so having lived in different places and having identity of another place, how does that influence your self identity and in turn your writing? So for example, just for you, Dada, when you go home, I know you were recently back in your Uru, how do people see you differently now as a city person, as a Bangalore person? And if so,
how does that make you feel, and what do you think about it? I think yes, because to be very honest, there was some marriage pressure going on in my in my home, and my mom very strangely asked me like, "Hey, one thing I'll ask you, should not feel bad. So, do your writing circle force you to not to get married?" Maybe I think that's a very good thing which I can quote that. So what? Because they're scared, like, oh, so many things happens in city. It seems like do they tell you that don't marry and write or something? Mom, shut up. So I think, of course, yes, because people start to look differently because they are aware that city gives a lot of freedom, a lot of open-mindedness. So yeah, on all those things.
I guess I'm going back, since you said I'm an old Bangalorean, I'm going back to an identity of that often gets, hello? Yeah. An identity of Bangalore that often gets a little bit erased in this vision of Bangalore as something that went from being a sleepy retirement place to an IT monster. A part of Bangalore that often gets forgotten is that it was always a science city. It was always the center of scientific inquiry and therefore of a lot of academic and also public-private kind of research institutions. And so there's a whole separate identity of Bangalore that I think is a layer that is now kind of quiet, but is a very strong presence. And so I'm going back to that, and I'm thinking about the fact that I used to be a scientist, or maybe once a scientist, always a scientist. I don't know. But anyway, I think the thing is that when I transitioned into writing literature and sort of left science behind, there's so much of that scientific identity that's still within me, I think. And even though I no longer think in a very precise fashion, and I can probably barely add anymore, and like everybody else use, some sort of device, I exaggerate, I can still add better than many of the small kids who come along because they all use their devices. But I think many of the questions that I was exploring, and I've talked about this often, but especially a question of life, what is life? I think that is somehow very much embedded in the way I think about my writing. And so, for example, the reason why I've been thinking about why I'm so fascinated by the water bodies and their transitions in the urban environment. And I think it's partly because water, life as we know it wouldn't exist without water. And in a sense, it's that whole process of, the miracle, as it were, of some two molecules coming together and then, having this whole extraordinary thing happen. So I think in that sense, yeah, my scientific identity does come in. And as for all the others, well, it's too large a question maybe to enter into today.
One response I can give to your question is I used to work in a place called Malleshwaram, Sultan Palya, Shivaji Nagar, and RT Nagar spaces and all that. And so in each space be having a different set of communities. Say, for example, Cottonpet, Chickpet, all have, this Marwari, ghettos, and RT Nagar, Sultan Palya is majorly populated with Muslim community and all. So when I was working in these spaces or interacting in these spaces, and I used to know, I should understand how this, the caste, class, and other things which I used to have in my native and other spaces, how it is retransformed and which is manifesting in these spaces in a different way. So that's number one. And also I feel like the constant denominator of too much of over jingoism and the patriarchal structures and all suffocating structures, too much of moral policing, I think it is manifesting in a different way, and that has not changed. So that has been working as a constant common denominator. Though we move cities or even metro cities, it is evident. Say, for example, in most of the interviews, they ask, what's your name? We tell with initial. Okay, what is that? Initial. Okay, we don't have a surname. Okay, cool. So tell me, where are you from? So if I say Sultan Palya, they get a sense of what it is. Or if I say, okay, my name is Suhas Rajput. Okay, so some things they also judge about, oh, Rajput, they are Kshatriyas, they're warriors thing. So all those things are, in this way, the class, caste are manifesting in different ways in even cities. So in my native, the caste is maybe direct. They say that, hey, ಅವರು ಇವರದಾರ ಅವ್ರ ಮನೆಗೆ ಹಂಗೆಲ್ಲ ಇಸ್ಕೊಳಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ನೀನು ತಟ್ಟಿ ಗಿಟ್ಟಿ ಕೊಡ್ಬಾರ್ದು ಬಿಡತ್ತ ಹೋಗ್ಲಿ. So we say in that dialect because caste is very direct. Here it is very posh and just like sophisticated and they say and all that. So these are things when I used to change locations and how people change and how, but the constant denominator is almost same and manifests in different ways.
So actually, the question that we posed right in the beginning was when you said you'd enter anonymity in the city, and I said, do you still feel that? Well, yeah.
When you are standing between the line as a writer, and when you are writing about your character also between the line, how do you deal with the... Do you ever go through this sense of who am I becoming? What am I becoming? And not just about you as a writer, but also as a character. Because there's so much of movement taking place. You're traveling, you're moving. There's so much changing constantly. Do you at any point feel like, what is happening? Who am I? Where am I going?
That
Sense of like confusion.
I think I should feel all the time because I think everybody feels one or the other time in their lifetime. No, who am I? Where am I? What I'm going to do? But in a very interesting way, I used to write one column called as Junction Point to online magazine called Kendasampiki. I think Rupashri ma'am is here. Rupashri Kaliganuru ma'am, no? No, sorry, I think I'm mistaken. Sorry. So I think the whole column is about the people I meet in the PG thing because PGs and room stays are like people doing different kinds of job, organized sector, unorganized sector and IT. So morning they go like a birds, again during evening they come back. So and then we used to have a stories of what this and all, and everyone has at one point of time, at least when we are drinking or Sundays, and this will be like, macha yenidu life alli yen ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ. I think the sense of that, what are we becoming in a city which has intersections of different language, different locations, either even if it has a migration to it, still the question paper is too much difficult, and culture context. So all these things, I think everyone will go through. I though personally will always feel like write about it. So maybe I'll wait for the correct language or the sentences to come in between the lines. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this conversation. This was really lovely, and thank you to everyone with the really lovely questions and engaging so much with this session of ours. Our next series scripts is scheduled for the 30th of this month, and we'll be launching Sundar Sarukai's new book, which is Water Days, and more details will be on our website, so please follow us. And thank you to you for coming here and doing this, and I hope everyone has a good evening and good night.
Thank you, IHS.